Welcome to Leadership from the Heart, the podcast that dives deep into the world of operational focused leadership. I'm your host, Romie, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on the journey of discovery, growth, and transformation. In each episode, we'll explore the essential principles of effective leadership that not only drive results, but also touch the very core of the human connection. At Leadership from the Heart, we believe that leadership is more than just a title. It's a commitment to inspire, empower, and guide with authenticity and compassion. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Leadership from the Heart. Today, I have with us Roy Dockery. He's currently a leader in the service industry, a keynote speaker, a pastor, an artist, and an architect of a leadership framework that uses truth, love, and empathy to maximize impact. Most recently, Roy has been recognized as one of the Hot Topics Top 100 Service Visionaries by a panel of global industry experts. Congratulations on that, Roy, and welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good, right? It's been an interesting week already, but even though it's early in, but no, but it's been good and I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Love having you. So tell me a little bit about your journey. This is the first time we're talking, which is really cool. I love the authentic vibe that we're going to get from it. And tell me how you got started in your leadership journey. Was it in the military? Was it before military?
Well, it's interesting, right? It's when the journey started and when you realized you were on it, right? Because
Sure.
sometimes there are two different things. When I look back, I realized I was leading most of my life, even though I didn't play organized sports, right? My brother was a basketball player, ran track. So my brother was always kind of in organized sports. I was kind of a nerd, but then most of the people in my family were kind of thugs. So I had a weird kind of balance, right? Like I hung around like gangsters and drug dealers a lot, but I was really good at school. But I realized like they used to ask me a lot of questions. I used to give people advice. And some of my older cousins used to call me Uncle Roy because they were like, he's got a different kind of wisdom. So they'd be like, hey, what you think about this, Uncle Roy? And they were like 20 years older than me. But I don't think I realized until I got to college. So I got to college. I didn't go to college immediately after high school. I actually had no plans to go to college. I only went because my girlfriend at the time wanted to go to college. And I was like, okay, then I'll figure out. Now, keep in mind, didn't see myself as a leader, and from the age of 16 or 17, I was an assistant manager at a Domino's as a teenager,
Wow.
right? But didn't think about it as leadership, thought about it as I'm getting this money because I got to survive, right? So, but then when I decided to go to college and I noticed because I had lived on my own, taking care of myself. I had a management level job. I knew about credit. I knew about finances and just doing adult things. Like I had been adulting before I got to college. And I started noticing people just would follow me around and it was really weird. And I remember I was at orientation and I was walking around campus and I turned around and there were like 20, if I remember, there were 27 people following me. And I looked at them and I was like, why are you following me? Like, I'm not a tour guide. Like, why are you all following me? And like the two or three people behind me said, like, you looked really confident in where you were going. So like we all thought you were like leading a tour. Like they thought I was like a peer leader or they thought that I was like a part of a program at the school, like showing them where to go. And I had no idea where I was going.
Sure.
But what I wasn't was afraid of being lost, right?
Mm.
Like I'm on a college campus. Like I've been in some of the worst neighborhoods in the country at this point in my life. Like we're on a college campus. I feel pretty safe, and I'm pretty sure I can walk up to one of these buildings, read a sign, and then figure out where I need to go or where I don't need to go. So I think that's the first time that it dawned on me that people follow me.
Right.
Right. And then when I started thinking about it, I'm like, oh, well, people have been following me for a long time. So then, even like my freshman year of college, I started a on campus organization called Generation of Survivors to teach students about credit, because there are a lot of, the predatory credit cards on campus, teach people about cell phones and things of that nature, and just kind of how to take care of themselves because a lot of people come to college and they're not conditioned and poised to survive,
Right.
right? So they wind up the stress of being independent coupled with like a higher level of educational demand, that's what a lot of people collapse under, right? A lot of
Mm,
people start doing bad at school because they don't know how to be adults. And then it's like a compounding thing. And I saw that. So I was like, well, let me start an organization where I can, in a strategic way, help lead people through being an adult so that like you get that foundation established and then you can focus on being successful in school. So I think that was the when I first noticed it, and it just kind of grew from there. And it just became a normal part of. And I think at the time I still didn't really see myself as a leader, but I took responsibility knowing that people would follow me. So like if you're gonna follow me, let me at least show you something. And so, and I just feel like God kind of like gave me that conviction. Like people are following you, so you got to be mindful about what you do and like have something for them to follow. So, right, I'm
sure.
like documenting stuff and creating processes and like trying to help people walk through things because I don't want people to stumble. Um, but at the time, I didn't really see myself as I didn't see myself as a leader probably until I was, in like a director level role, making high
Oh,
six
wow.
figures in income, right? Like, was like, oh, I'm a leader because now I'm on leadership teams and I'm on the executive leadership team and and I'm doing all of that. But it was kind of the title came when other people assessed it, but when I look at what God had done, I'm like, you've been preparing me
The
in
whole time.
leadership and processing the whole time. But yeah, the most pronounced one was in college when I kind of stepped out and started helping the people who choose to follow me, even though I didn't see myself as a leader.
Wow, that's pretty dope. I think that you hit something there about, not being afraid to be lost. That's a key aspect of what I would consider a leader, right? Somebody who knows that even though I don't know where I'm going, I know I'm going to get somewhere, right? I'm going to figure it out, and I think that's
Yeah.
pretty dope. I think that's a really good attribute that we don't call out enough yet. I think that's a really good attribute. Besides all the other things that you mentioned, starting a program and helping college kids learn how to be an adult because we were never taught to be an adult, right? We just got to college and thought people were going to care about us the same way they did in high school, and that's not the case.
Yeah, it's like there's that cutover, right? Like you're grown, but like you said, they're like adulting like hasn't been communicated, right? It's like,
Correct.
and there's a lot of disconnects. Like my oldest daughter just started college, and like we've been kind of preparing her from an adulting perspective for a while. So she's like the counselor, right? And
Yeah.
she's calling us, getting advice like these kids don't understand. But I tell people like adulting is a myth for me. Like my kids aren't adults until they're married, right? Until you're married, you're my kids. Like I will help you as you mature,
Navigate,
but
right.
like you're not on your own just because you're at college or and so now I've got a bunch of adopted kids now in college that we're helping with different things, but it's because the
Right.
parents, like somehow we wrongly perceive that our responsibility for leading our children ends when they leave our house.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it never ends, right? They always need your leadership, whether they ask for it or whether they appreciate it or not. They always need it.
Right.
So being available is important. But no, I definitely agree that like we can't be afraid to be lost, right? Like to um, you're not going to get everything right. And even when I used to train people in the military, in corporate, the one thing I would tell them, and they were like, "Well, how do I know when I'm ready?" And I kid you not, I would tell everybody, you're ready when you're not afraid to break it.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're ready. Doesn't matter what you're working on. It can be a computer, it can be a robot, it can be a nuclear reactor, which I've worked on all of the above. I've worked on pharmacy robots and autonomous mobile robots. You're sufficiently trained when you're not afraid to break something, right? Because
Sure.
doesn't matter, I might mess it up, but at the end of the day, I
I know
can
how to
get
push
it to
back.
work. Like I
Exactly.
understand the operation, I understand the theory enough to get it to work. So once people got past that hesitancy of like, oh well, like you got to ask 1,000 questions before you touch something because you're afraid that you might do the wrong thing. I think that's where the theory comes from in troubleshooting, but I think that's also where and I talk about it in my book, when we understand our purpose, I think that's when you're not afraid to make a mistake. Because like I know where I'm going. So like I might do something wrong, I might make a misstep, I might make a bad decision, I might waste some money, I might waste some time, but I know where I'm going, so
Right.
I can always recalibrate to that. And so I'm not afraid to move forward because I know what my purpose is in the direction that I'm supposed to be headed
Preach. I know you're
in.
passionate. So preach. That's good. Let's talk about your book, The Art of Leading.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about your book. So what's the preface? What is what I would want to know first, what inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, so I at one point in 2023, 2022, I was mentoring 57 people around the world, right? Various levels. Artists, CEOs, executives, former incarcerated individuals, the
Hmm.
teenagers, single moms, like a very, very diverse group of people that I was mentoring. Had a Patreon community and
Oh,
all of this
nice.
stuff and YouTube videos and Zoom, like family Zoom calls. Had a whole community established under what I call the Savage Truth. But one of the things that I realized is that even though people were in very different stages of life, economically, from an education perspective, from a socioeconomic perspective, everybody was asking me the same questions. And
Hmm.
so like everybody was trying to figure out like how to have more of an impact in their life, in their spheres of influence. But a lot of people were trying to figure out how do they change their perspective of themselves, right? How do they get a healthier view and a healthier understanding of who they are so that they can lead well, right? And so whether that's in their family, leading their churches, their nonprofits, their record labels, right, their tours, whatever it is. And so when I stepped back and looked at all the people that I had been talking to, I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make like a YouTube masterclass on like here are the principles of leadership that I think are important that you
Hmm.
need to be successful in life, in your personal pursuits, your relationships, as well as spiritually, right? Like these are the things I think you need to do. And so I did that video series that was like primarily for my mentees, and then like a bunch of people on my LinkedIn picked it up and some other people started watching it. But then my mentees were like, that was really good. We love the videos. But can we have more information? And I was like, okay. And again, and just trying to, I'm a process person. So like like I said, even early on, right? Like write things down, document it, what you expect. So I took the 13 videos and then I converted that into a 13 chapter book that
Hmm.
had all the principles laid out. Then also a section that I call principles in action, which are like, for instance, my foundational leadership principle is love, right? So like the first thing you need to understand if you're going to be a leader anywhere in life is love. And so then in every chapter, as I expound, there's the concept, the framework, but then I actually talk about that concept in real life. Like, what does love look like as a vice president or a manager leading employees? Right. And so there's a section called principles in action. And then I also have questions for reflection where people kind of take the time to try to internalize what you just read. But then also I ask the questions on there are some concepts that are going to challenge you because of experiences, because of the way that we look at things. So the questions for reflection are to help people kind of recalibrate their perspective. And so what I always say is like everyone reads the book. It only takes like 2 hours to read the book, but then
Okay.
it actually takes like 10 years to apply it,
Sure.
right? Because it's an ongoing process of internal transformation. So more than half of the book is about being a leader. It's not about task delegation and accountability and all of this other stuff that you'll read in a lot of other books because I've read a lot of those leadership books. But I
Right.
actually focus on being a leader. Like, what does it mean to be a leader? What does that mean to you? What does that look like? And then how does that translate into your vulnerability, your authenticity, your transparency, the way that you love people, the way that you show empathy, the way that you model work life harmony, right? So it's like structuring all of that. So the book is 13 chapters, seven of the chapters are on being a leader. Um, then I transition into doing leadership. There's only like two
Mm.
chapters on doing leadership. It's not that deep, right? You delegate and you hold people accountable. That's
Right.
leadership, right? Like
Yep.
it's not that complicated when you're not the problem
Right.
as the leader, when you're not micromanaging, when you trust people, when you're not driving anxiety in a toxic work environment because you have people unnecessarily competing because their
Yep.
expectations aren't clear, right? And so I literally go from 7 chapters about being a leader to 2 chapters where it's like delegate and hold people accountable, and then the last chapters of the book are actually about when you have to develop or terminate employees,
Hmm.
and then I also talk about when do you transition as a leader, and not leaving because of a toxic work environment, not leaving because of anything bad. But one thing that isn't talked about in a lot of leadership books is when do you need to leave as a leader because you have become the ceiling for everybody beneath you,
Correct.
right? And so, and I kind of call that like, like transitioning with grace, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, hey, like the people underneath me can't move up further if I'm still in this seat. So the best
Yep.
thing that I can do for my team is to actually leave. And I think we see this a lot, especially in nonprofits and in churches, right? Where the
People just stay
succession
there.
planning, like you just
Mm.
stay there forever. And that's why you see the kind of trend in America that there are a lot of churches that are dying,
Yeah.
right? And they're dying because like you've been the head of that church for a very long time, and when you
Right.
should have handed it over, you didn't.
Yeah.
And so the new energy didn't come in, new like innovation didn't come in, like a new spirit, a new level of wisdom and discernment. And so everything starts to kind of die. And I would use the example like, show me anybody that's run an organization for 30 years and hasn't replaced themselves that you would consider to be successful.
Sure. I
There aren't
could not
many, right?
agree
So
more.
like
Yeah.
you either built the company and handed it off to somebody else, right? Like if you look at it, like it's interesting because in the nonprofit and in the church space, where especially in church and Christian church anyway, our focus is supposed to be discipleship. So if our entire focus is supposed to be equipping people as a pastor for the work that we're doing, how have I never equipped anybody to do my job?
Sure.
Right? Like that
Sure.
that doesn't make any sense, but it's because we hold on to it, and no one really teaches that in church.
Yeah.
I've been in church leadership classes, I've been to seminary. Nobody talks about succession planning and stepping down. So I think even when people hear from God, they don't know what to do with it, or it's too late, or they think it's the devil. They be like, nah, that ain't Jesus telling me to step down from my church. That ain't nothing but the enemy, right? And it was like, no, it was Jesus. You just you weren't expecting it. But when you study it and look at healthy churches that thrive, that grow, it's because they also get new leadership, right? And you don't wait until the pastor dies to replace the head of the organization, because that doesn't give you enough information, enough time to transfer. That's one of the things I talk about, like that transition. Like I'm still in a
Yeah.
space where I can pour into you, so everything that I have I can give you, and then you can bring even more to the table. Where if it's if the new leadership only steps up when I die, then that new leader didn't get to glean anything from me because I didn't actually transition when I should have.
Absolutely. And that translates to churches, corporations. But my question to you is, why do you think they don't make the transition? Do you think they don't know where to go, what to do next, how to become the kind of board of directors, or, that extra, step of why don't people make that move? Specifically churches, but I think it could I think it could translate into, especially family owned businesses.
Yeah, and I was about to say, you definitely see it outside. You see it in, and I guess I would call them generational businesses, right?
Right,
Churches a lot of time are generational, right? The
right.
church came up through, and you see the same thing with a lot of trades, right? Electrical companies,
Yep.
construction companies. And so I think the one thing is, and so the first thing I would say is fear.
Yeah.
Is
Sure.
that you're just afraid of what'll happen if you're not there,
Yeah.
right? Like you're afraid of what your legacy will look like. It's almost like what your baby would look like if you put it in somebody else's hands. And
Hmm.
this is the same. I mean, you have this with, and I mean, and just to take it to from a business perspective, you see this with a lot of startup CEOs, where
Yeah.
they're kind of above their head, and then the investors have to come in and forcibly remove them. But no
Yep.
one does that in the church, right? So it's kind of like, You just kind of let it. You just kind of let it continue to happen. So I think fear is one. I think another thing that's kind of adjacent to fear is identity, right? Like a lot of people
Yeah.
find their identity in being that
Being more
owner, in
yeah.
being the founder, in being the lead pastor who's been here since 1962. And so to go do something else, to be that pastor emeritus, to go be that, that board person, that advisor, that, which the world needs those as well, but it's a different identity that I don't think people are prepared for. Because again,
Sure.
if you look at it, which is funny because corporate America to me mimics a lot of biblical principles when you talk about discipleship. Because when you had like the Apostle Paul who was running around setting up churches, like most of the New Testament in the early church in the first 200 years after Jesus died wouldn't have existed if Paul
If it
didn't
was
move
right.
around and develop people
Yeah.
and establish churches and then act as a mentor for a group of people versus him having to be the senior pastor, right? Paul
Yeah.
was never the senior pastor, but he's responsible for basically the early movement of all Christianity, especially outside of the primary area, because he's the one that went to Asia and Macedonia and and all of these other places. And so I think it's hard because it's not modeled very well, and it's also not um I don't think a lot of people just know it and understand it, right? You spend so much time like in a church space that like you don't really see the way that like development and transition works like in the rest of the world
Right.
with people and with organizations, because yeah, like the typical thing for people who get older as a CEO, they wind up becoming an advisor, or they go
Right.
sit on some. I sit on 3 different advisory boards and I'm not even that old, right? Like I'm already in an advisory role because all of my previous executive positions, I handed to the people who I mentored, right?
Yeah.
And they took over for me. And then so I just moved into an advisory role. And so I think there needs to be more space and like articulation of like, here's some things that you can transition to, because a lot of people don't want to retire. They don't want to
Yeah.
sit at home and do nothing. And so I don't think they're aware of a lot of those opportunities. So they hold on to that identity as the senior pastor and the founder, because they fear what that unknown looks like. They don't want to be
Mhm.
retired. They don't want to just be like a member, but there are other options for them to explore that I just don't. And I mean, in me being, I've been a pastor for 8 years, like I haven't seen a lot of like advisory boards or consultants for churches, right? Like until you get into certain spaces, you get into some majority white church spaces, you see a lot more of it. You see those pastors retire and go teach at seminaries, right? They
Yeah.
they go work in some of those institutions. So I think in the black church primarily, we also lack a lot of the organizational structure that a lot of
Mm.
the other denominations have. We don't have a lot of, like historically black seminaries, right?
Right.
So where when you look at like the Southern Baptist Convention, they got like 5 universities that you could go teach at, right? And so I think some of that is missing as well, just the overall structure to support it. But it's modeled in other places, even in other aspects of Christianity that are in more like kind of mainline Protestant denominations. You
Okay.
actually see them do it pretty well, but it's lacking in significantly in the majority black church.
Yeah, it sounds like another book called like What's Next, just giving people an idea of, because I do think that you're right. I think that the fear of the unknown is what stops people. And specifically for, African Americans, our brothers and sisters, I think we stay stuck
Yeah.
thinking this is the best we have, right? When there's so much more that we can uncover, because there's no reason why we can't have a black seminary, um, university or school. There's absolutely no reason other than we haven't come together to do it.
Yeah.
That's
And, and
that's it.
and there are, and I think there are places where you can serve, and like you said, it's like even I left an executive role back in April, and I
Hmm.
literally just prayed and I was like, okay, guys, so what's next? Like literally
Right.
what you just said, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm gonna go do. And I
But I'm
actually
gonna trust.
prayed. I said what I would want to do. I'm like, the natural progression for me is to go from being a senior VP, senior executive, to go be like a COO. So I'm like, but I literally told God, I said, if you don't want me to be a COO, then give me conviction that that's what you don't want me to go do, and then I'll let you decide what I do next.
Sure.
And it's funny because people were reaching out to me, offering me COO roles, doing all this other stuff, and I felt no excitement, no joy,
Mm,
no, like,
mm,
and I love working, I love service, I love leading people, but it felt weird. And then it was
right.
like, and then I was like, well, maybe it's just that company, right? Maybe. And then so I'm like, well, let me go apply for some jobs that look like it's something that I want to do. And I was getting like physically nauseous filling out the application. And I was just like, yeah,
Is
this
that
isn't what you
conviction?
want me to do right now. It's that I
Mm,
asked for the conviction, he gave it to me. And then so I said, okay, God, so then you tell me, you bring it to me. Like, I trust you. Like, I trust you with my family, I trust you with my finances, I trust you with everything. So you tell me what's next. And for like 2 months, I didn't look for a job at all. I just kept doing what he told me to do. I was making some video posts, doing stuff on social media. I had like, I was speaking. I got an opportunity. God opened the door for me to go speak in Stockholm, Sweden, on leadership. I had some
cool.
consulting. So even though I wasn't working, like, I had business coming in and
Right.
connections coming in, and I'm like, is this what you want me to do? You just want me to do consulting and leadership? And he was like, no, I want you to evangelize for the service industry. That's what I
Mm,
want you to do. And I posted a TikTok video, and then the company that I used to be on the advisory board for was like, we have an opening for what you just described on TikTok. So would you like that job? And that's what I do now, right? So I still do leadership consulting. I've got my own business, but now I consult with Fortune 500 companies. I get to help them identify their problems, but then also I'm helping the largest service organizations in the world adjust how they recruit so that we
right.
can improve diversity, we can bring in younger people so that they're reinitiating apprenticeship programs and doing things to get the folks in that they need. And I'm the anomaly, right? I'm the youngest person in the industry, have been for the last decade, and now I'm the one that's consulting and advising everybody as well. So I'm like, only God could maneuver that. But again, you just had to be like, I don't see myself as a researcher, right? Like, I'm an
Right.
applications engineer, right? That's my background, it's my education. But that's what fit the desire that I had, the purpose that God gave me. And it was just, once I got past the fear of like needing to understand what it would look like,
Mhm.
it was like he gave it to me, and I was like, all right, there we go, right? So, and it's
There it is.
but the interesting thing about leadership is, and I talk about this when I do consulting, the first thing that we lead is ourselves.
Yes.
So like
Yes.
the first thing you have to do is like, we are normally limited by where anyone can take us because our perspective is limited. So
Correct.
like, no one can lead, you can lead somebody, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Like, if you can't change your own perspective, if new information, if new insight can't change your perspective, then you're never going to move, right? So it doesn't matter how good a leader you have, how awesome of a mentor you've got. If you don't lead by changing your own perspective, you'll just stay stuck where you are, and then you don't get to walk out your purpose and fulfill, ultimately what God made you for.
For sure. I ask people all the time, if would you follow you? Would you follow yourself? Because if you wouldn't, then there's some reflection to do there. And I don't think leadership and a lack of self-awareness or a lack of self-reflection go together.
Yeah.
You're definitely needing to do a lot of self-reflection if you're trying to actually be the leader, because it's deep work. People don't Not a lot of people understand how deep that work is, because you almost have to like abandon yourself or what you've created, right? This identity, to be able to become what you're meant to be. And it takes a lot of people are going to tell you what they think, and sometimes
Yeah.
that hurts, and you're going to have to be able to navigate through those emotions in the most way, and it's not throwing temper tantrums or anything like that. But
Yeah.
tell me, what is the most unexpected or exciting twist that you've had in your career so far? Because we've talked about a lot. So I want
Yeah.
to know what was like the either the most unexpected or the peak.
So the most unexpected, which also wound up being kind of a peak, right? So
There
I'll
you
tie
go.
the two together. I had been working in healthcare technology for 12 years. the pandemic had hit. We went through that whole thing. I had employees that got forced to get vaccinated against their will. We had employees that had to resign because their states or the county they worked in didn't allow religious or medical exemptions. So went through all of that from 2020 into 2021, 2022. Probably one of the most stressful times
No doubt.
in my career of like adjusting all these policies, making sure people can safely get into hospitals to take care of equipment that ultimately helps patients. And so I'm in California speaking at an event, and I land on a Sunday and I get this email notification like, hey, we're gonna have a meeting really early in the morning tomorrow. And I'm like, this can't be good, right? It's never good when I'm on the West Coast and I get in, because our company was headquartered out of Europe. So I'm like, this is a global leadership meeting. Everybody needs to be on deck. And so basically what wound up happening is our CEO resigned and they were restructuring the whole company. And I ran two distinct divisions, but they were taking my team, because I ran the pharmacy division and the transport division. They were splitting those into two different companies. And
Oh,
so I'm
wow.
like, okay. And then so my boss had just got promoted to CEO, and he called me and he was like, Roy, like, I need you to help us understand, how do we structure this new organization. So they're like, we trust you, you understand the services within the organization. And so I went through my day, and then later on that night I sat there, I prayed, I said, God, like, you lead me, because I can write this organizational chart where I give myself more power, where I give myself more responsibility. And I think that's what they expected me to do.
Yeah,
But I'm like, what do you want me to do?
right.
And so I wrote an org chart, and the new org chart didn't have me in it,
Mm,
because I said, if you split these two companies, the value that I add as the expert that understands both actually diminishes. So I'm worth
hmm.
less. And I said, and the people who work for me can actually step up to be
Do
the
more.
leaders of these organizations. And so I'm like, and so I literally sent that to my boss, and he had to call me. He was like, am I missing a slide? Is there like a typo? Like, where are you on this? I said, I'm not on it, because with the org change, I no longer need to be here. And he was like, well, what do you mean? Where are you going to go? I said, I have no idea, but God will work it out. And then, and I just kind of left it at that. And so I'm in California. I fly back home on Thursday, and then I had somewhere else to go on Friday. And I'm like, I didn't really check my inbox and all that stuff on LinkedIn. So when I finally slow down, I think on Friday afternoon, I checked my inbox on LinkedIn, and I had a message from somebody saying, hey, there's this startup organization that's looking for somebody to lead and to build out their service organization. Like, you're a perfect fit. You've been recommended by all these people. What do you think? Right? So literally within 3 weeks of me sending that email and removing myself from a job description, I wound up in a new role with almost $100,000 raise and millions of dollars in equity in a startup company. Right?
There you go.
Where so and to me, it was tied to being obedient, because that message came after I surrendered my own job.
For sure.
Right? Which, and to be honest, I love my job. I love the people who work for me. I love the people that I work with. Honestly, I only work like 18. Making over $200,000 a year, and you only work like 18 to 20 hours a week isn't
Yeah,
bad. So I had time to preach. I had time to run outreach. Right? Like, I was running a nonprofit, pastoring, mentoring, and having a full-time job, making a ton of money that allowed me to
yeah,
do everything else I needed to do. But God pulled me out of that, so I had to be uncomfortable, and then He put me into that role. And I was at that company for exactly 2 years. And then He was like, and what happened is, I built the organization, but I'm like, you needed me to build it. And I told this to the CEO and the COO, who also thought I was crazy. I said, you needed me to build it, but you don't need me to run it.
yeah.
Like, you have leaders here that can run this organization. You just didn't have the structure in place that they needed to be successful. So I was like,
Sure.
again, I'm gonna go. Like, I'll go find something else to do, and like, I'll be a consultant. I'll work with you all from a leadership or process perspective. And then I stepped back from that, and then now, you know what I mean, gave me another job where I've got flexibility, and I get to advise corporations like Fortune 100, 500 companies all over the world, right? So that was crazy for me, because I went from healthcare to gunshot detection and license plate reader systems in law enforcement. So
Right.
it was a complete jump and shift, a completely different type of company, completely different industry, but it was fun to learn. There was a financial gain to it. I've gained a bunch of friends and mentees. Like I still talk to the CEO from the company. I check in on him every once in a while because he's a
Sure.
35-year-old multi-billionaire, right? And so I'm always like, "How you doing, man? You good? How's the family?" It's like, just checking in on him as well. So it was a great opportunity, but yeah, that was the first time that basically God told me to semi quit my job, and then he told me to do it again. So
That's that's
now I got
amazing.
less hesitancy when he tells me to move, because his plan is so much better than mine. So
100%. Now you have evidence, right? Backing your
yeah.
obedience, which is dope, which is really dope. How do you market yourself to be able to receive those types of advances or phone calls? How do you market yourself either on LinkedIn or network around um
Yeah, around everything. It's funny. I am absolutely terrible at marketing myself. So that's one. So what I do, because I don't naturally, I tell people all the time, I'd rather talk about a problem than myself.
sure,
So that's why it's hard for me to market myself, because me just telling you about me actually isn't solving your problem. I'd rather
for
you
sure.
tell me what your problem is and I can tell you how to solve it. But one of the ways that I think God kind of balanced that is that so I pray about what I need to do, and I do it consistently,
Okay.
right? So, and then your reputation, your integrity, the way that you build your network, and one of the other things that God told me as well is like, pay attention to the people that are already placed in your life,
Mm,
and make sure that you're like leveraging the connections I already gave you, right?
yeah,
So like everything that I had this year that was new business, none of those were new people, right? Those were people who already knew me. Those were people, and that's been happening for like 3 or 4 years, because
right.
when I have a speaking engagement, when I'm, sitting on advisory boards, when I'm traveling, the content that I post on my LinkedIn, it's a matter of being consistent, right? And being like, I post a leadership tip every day. That's not a holiday, Monday through Friday. I posted a leadership tip every day since February 20th. So it's almost 8 months now that I posted a leadership tip every day. That's driven business. That sold my books. That's given me speaking engagements all over the world. Like it's not
Consistency.
overproduced, right? Like I've got cameras and lights and all kind of stuff. I intentionally record it from my cell phone every day, just so I can be consistent. Because if I'm traveling, I can't record from my setup. I can't use all of
Right.
my DSLRs and spotlights and key lights and all of that stuff, because I've produced movies and done photography and everything else as well. Um, but it was being consistent, and then I think like the Bible says that like a good reputation is worth its weight in gold, right? I think
No
I think
doubt.
the other thing is
No
just
doubt.
having a good reputation. And the one thing that I was talking to somebody, and I said the challenge with entrepreneurship that I think messes up a lot of people is that you will move faster if you exaggerate, but you won't go far, right? So like the tendency to communicate with hyperbole, right?
Hmm.
Like to
For sure.
exaggerate how much money you make and how many deals you closed, and right, like it gets you more attention from a marketing
No
perspective,
doubt.
but it doesn't get you any longevity. So like
Correct.
I'm reaping the benefits of 5 to 10 years of never being late, always showing up to a meeting on time, being honest about what I know, what I don't know, right? And having a reputation that it was funny. I was telling a friend of mine, I figured out this year that my reputation literally charged 10 times more than I did. So my reputation was so strong. I'm charging $500 an hour. People thought I charged $5,000 an hour.
Sure.
So when they reached out to me and I gave them a quote, they were like, "What?" Like, and they were like, "Yeah, we just figured you were like, we didn't reach out to you before this because we figured your price was here." And then most of them
Right.
told me, "So please put your price here." Right? Like raise it. Like, cuz we've been saving money. Like we've been budgeting and we put it in our
For
budget to
you.
pay you that much.
Right. Right.
And so that was the thing for me. And I'm like, I was just being consistent. But I think consistency is the key. And I think your reputation is more important than likes, clicks,
No doubt.
visibility, right? Because it's that one thing that you
No
communicate,
doubt.
right? Because it's you can't control when you go viral, but you can control who goes viral
And what goes
and
viral.
what goes,
Right.
because if you're
Right.
consistent all the time and
Right.
then you being you, like you're Romie, you're doing what you do, and that goes viral, that's
Yeah.
fine. Where like versus the one day where you decide to go off on somebody in the parking garage and then that goes viral. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yep.
it's and
Yep.
that's what I would
It's
tell
what you
artists.
wanted.
Yeah, and I did music for 20 years, right? And I would tell people, be mindful of what you put in your music,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the song that might define you, right? The
Mm-hmm.
one goofy song that you make about doing drugs when you don't even do drugs, you don't even curse, but you decide to make this one dumb song that's a parody, and now that song goes viral and it becomes your identity that you can't
Yep.
pivot from, or you
Yep.
lose all of that traction. And so
Yeah.
that's the thing, like consistently being the same person and just making sure your integrity is the thing that you hold. Don't communicate what you can't do. Don't exaggerate. Don't lie, because that will crumble an empire quickly, right?
Yes.
Like be consistent, build with consistency, and definitely leverage the relationships that you have. Most of the people that you need to accomplish what God put in you, He already introduced you to, but you don't talk to them because you spend too much time on TikTok or Instagram or texting the toxic people in your life who need too much attention, right? So
100%.
yeah,
Yeah. And always thinking that it's outside, that there's somebody else instead of you already have what you need. You have everything you need already, which I love. I love that message.
yeah.
That's good. That's good. What is one piece of advice, perhaps leadership advice, that you wish you would have gotten earlier in your career?
I wish people would have said the difference between management and leadership.
Mm,
That
let's
you
go ahead.
manage
That's
tasks, but you lead people.
correct.
So make sure, and just to tell me, right, or even to tell me years ago that what I was doing was leadership would have been helpful. Um,
Right.
but like if you're in a Ken Blanchard has a quote that I put in my book, but he said leadership is the process of influence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like no matter how much influence you have, but like that process of influence, that's what leadership is, right? So it's small bites, big bites, it doesn't matter. But I think that's the main thing that like, and I say this to all of my mentees, every career, every person I think has to choose one of two paths. You either want to be an expert or a leader of people. That's it. Because and you mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of sacrifice to be a leader of people. You can't be an expert. You can't be an expert in coding. You're not going to be the expert in project management or engineering or applications or anything. You're not, because you're going to have to take a significant amount of time getting to know people, to understand people, and that's where a lot of people fail. That they
Yeah.
they they want to be an expert who's a manager, when
Yeah.
organizations need leaders who
Correct.
are committed to understanding people, knowing people, and leading people. So that differentiation for me earlier on, to be honest, I probably wouldn't have went and got an MBA. Right? I spent all this time
Mm.
getting an MBA and then became an executive. I've never used it. Right? Like it might help now with some statistical analysis, but I could have got that from Chat GPT or Gemini, right? Like it was a lot because I felt like that was a requirement. Like I gotta
Yeah.
understand all of this management. And like I never really needed to do that because where I thrived was leading people. And I had brilliant people who worked for me. I had intelligent people that were around me, and I was able to learn whatever I needed to learn. But when I started focusing my energy on learning leadership development, studying psychology and
Yeah.
sociology and human behavior and
Yes.
organizational behavior, I was like, I'm just sitting around in meetings like I know everything that's about to happen in this meeting. And not because I got an MBA, but because of your personality type and your insecurities and your body
It's
language, right?
showing.
I could tell you everything that's about to happen.
Yep.
And I think that's it, man. People really need to understand like you either want to be a leader of people or you want to be an expert, and then you choose where you invest that time, right?
For
Either
sure.
going deep into a principal or a functional group or functional area, or spending your time understanding people, knowing people. And because the more people that you know, the more perspectives that you understand, the easier it is for you to love them, even when you don't like them. And you can always effectively lead people that you love.
Yes. Yes, but you have to love people. And I think I've been thinking about what you just said for a couple weeks now, because I've encountered the same thing. I think organizations need to choose if they want a leader or if they want the expert as well. Not just people.
Yeah,
I think we mismanage or we recruit what we want to be an expert and we want them to be a leader, and then they're not so good at one or the other, and then we have things to say or performance reviews about it. And I agree with you 100% in that, you need to choose, but also organizations need to know what they want. As far as, hey, we just need a leader in this role to guide and help people be their best selves, or no, actually, this is going to be more of an individual contributor that may manage tasks, but
yeah.
we need a person to be the expert.
Exactly. And you may
Or
lead projects, right? And like I said, an
correct.
expert may lead a couple of people, but
Of
they're going to
people,
be task project oriented people.
oriented people.
And
Exactly.
but there's always been a false dichotomy that the person who's the best at something is the best leader.
Oof.
And corporate America is still overwhelmingly dealing with that issue that you were the best programmer, so I made you the manager of programming.
Yep.
And so, but what you're starting to see now is that you have these other people who are getting introduced into organizations that are just leaders, right?
Yep.
I've led software engineering teams, and I haven't wrote code since 2003, right? Like I've led advanced engineering groups, right? I've led project management groups, customer success organizations, salespeople. Like I've led all kinds of organizations because I understand people, right? Like
People.
I can understand your job, and I mean I've got a technical background. There's a lot of things that I can have an understanding of, but I wasn't the best technician. I'm not the best engineer. I'm not the best programmer. And there's also a false reality for the people in the roles that I've had to have a lot of conversations with the direct reports, and I have to tell them. You need to understand that your manager isn't supposed to be better at your job than you.
Correct.
That's not the, and so right, and so because that's who've been put that's who's been put in that role forever. That's what people expect, and so it actually takes them a while to get adjusted to a leader who's just like, what can I do for you today? How can I
Yes.
help you? How can I be
Yeah.
successful? Versus the person who can sit next to you and say, let me do your job with you.
Yep.
Like, no, I don't. And I remember when I first got into leadership, I had to take a humble. I didn't have to, but I chose to take a humble position because I was in my late 20s. All of my employees were in their 40s and their 50s. And I'm like, yeah, I'm smart, like I'm technical, but they all know more than me,
Yep.
right? So like I'm not the manager because I'm better at fixing things than you. I'm the manager because I looked at the organizational structure and told the rest of the company that need to change it. You
Yep.
didn't see that. I did, right? But I saw the people, I saw us violating Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I saw too many employees, the span of control from employees to technicians and a lack of development. That's what I saw. That's what I told our leadership team about. So they gave me the job to fix it. But it probably took me 4 or 5 months to let people know that, like, I'm not an expert. Like I can help you. I can help you find a problem. I can walk through things with you. I'm not an idiot, but like I expect you to be the expert, and then like
Yeah.
I will help you and I'll remove any obstacle that's stopping you from being
Exactly.
effective at your job, right? And then yeah, and I'm like honestly, like even most of those people I'm still cool with to this day. Like if you look on my LinkedIn page, most of the people who are commenting are the ones who gave me crap when I was first the manager, but
Right.
now they're leaders, right? And they've
Yeah.
transition to that. But even within corporate culture, you start seeing a lot of the newer people become leaders.
Yep.
And when the organizations understand that like my seniority as an individual contributor makes me an expert at completing this task, the funny thing is most of them don't want to lead people either, right? But it was the only way for them to make more money. It was the only way for them
Right.
to progress in their career. So when you fix that
Right.
problem, I will keep giving you more money for being really good at what you do, And
Exactly.
I need you to respect the leadership that we bring in to try to make your lives easier, to try to help you manage change, to to deal with all your other issues as well. So I saw that like completely transform within an organization when you effectively lead. Like it's shown that like yeah, like I was the experiment, right? Like can you hire the young guy? And not only did I work in a manager role, I worked in a director role, it worked in a VP role, it worked in a senior VP role.
Exactly.
And when you go back and look at those same companies, you see that that's stuck because
Yep.
the managers and the leaders aren't the people who have been there the longest. A lot of them are the
Yep.
people who have been there the least amount of time, or more than anything, they're the people who, like you said, are the ones who care about leading people, right? They love people, and so that's what they're going to invest their time in, even if they've got some technical expertise and all of that other stuff. Like they get fulfillment from leading and from helping people as well.
No doubt, no doubt. And like, a small tip for those leaders who, I was chosen to lead a group of drivers, like 250 CDL drivers. I've never driven a truck in my life, nor do I ever want to, right?
Yeah.
And my leader at the time was like, "You're gonna be all right. People, you got people." And I was just like, "Okay," because I was, a little skeptical as to what it all entailed. But what I found was this was the first time they were going to give the role to someone who wasn't a driver before. So like you, I was the experiment.
Yeah.
And what I found was I believed them when they said they had a barrier. And I
Yes.
believed them when they needed something and got it for them. And I found that that was the key, right? What made me successful was I'm not the expert. I don't want to be the expert, but I'm going to believe you, who is the expert, to do I'm going to give you what you need so that you can go do the job you need to do. And I mean, reaped rewards. And it was like the first time they were like, oh crap, we can give someone the job who's never done it before and they could be successful as long as they believe the expert,
Yeah.
right? As
And like
long
you
as they
said,
believe
when
the
you're
expert.
listening to those people, the funny thing for me was that, and I would always have to tell my mentees this, who kind of moved up through the traditional ranks and were kind of, I said, you have to understand one of the problems about knowing how to do the job is that you expect people to do it the way that you did it. Now, when
Mm.
you've never done the job, right, and you see somebody and they're like, this is really hard, you're like, that does look hard, right? Somebody
Right,
else who does the same thing is like, that's not hard, right? Like, I
right,
can do it. But you also
right.
might be 6'7" and 240 pounds, and the person who's
Yep,
5'7", weighing a buck 30 when it's raining outside may
yep,
not be able to do the same thing, right? So, like you said, you listen to them, you look at what they're doing, and because you don't know, right? Like you've just got to use like intuition and common
yep.
sense. And then it winds up
Exactly,
being so effective. But it's because you
exactly.
don't have, when you've done the job, a lot of times from a behavior perspective, you've hardwired your mind, and you're less flexible on different ways to do it. Because, right, like we
For sure.
say, it's more than one way to skin a cat. Most technical people think there's two ways, right? My way and then a way slightly different than my way, right? Like my way with
Yep,
two steps that are different, right? And so it is
yep.
really, and I've watched that where people will sit there and look at an employee who gets to the same outcome, but completely different than how they
Differently.
got
Yeah.
there. And it frustrates them. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why is that frustrating to you? And they're like, well, because they didn't do it this way. But I'm like, they didn't do it wrong. They didn't
Yep.
break any laws. They're not
Outcome is
violating
the same.
safety, right? But it does actually help when you can focus on the people without, because one of the things I say all the time, especially when I'm consulting, it's harder to untrain people than it is to
Yes.
train them, right? So when you don't know, it's really easy to be trained on like what's going on because I don't have to unlearn my expectations. I don't have to unlearn my personal experience, my personal
Right.
biases, and my personal preference. So when I come in, I can literally look like, okay, like you said, who are the five best drivers that we got? All right, I'm gonna
Yep.
go walk around and ride with them, and then I'm gonna
Yep.
take the best and bring it back in,
Yep.
and then it just works magically. And I'm like, it wasn't magic. I just looked at what they did, and then it made sense, right? But it always throws people off because a lot of people, it's really easy to get fixated on that. And that's why I would always do, like, I would write policies and all that stuff, but I would go ride with my technicians.
Yeah.
right? I just go like every month. I just go pick somebody and go spend a couple days in the field with them, and and just different people in different areas. Like go in the cold region in the wintertime, go in the hot region in the
Yeah.
summertime, like
Yeah.
just so we can
Go
see
see the
the
worst of it.
differences, right? But then that's when I
Yep.
started ordering UPF uh tech clothes, because all of my techs
Yep.
at my last job worked outside. None of their company apparel was sunproof.
Weatherproof. Right.
Right. So I'm like, I started ordering the long sleeves. We got them
Yep.
like the big hats, right? That
Yep.
blocked out the sun with the shade on the back. And that just took me going out in the field one time. We're like, it's hot out
Yep.
here. Get them some towels. We changed the travel policy that they can purchase as much Gatorade, water, or like
Yep.
electrolyte packets that they want to, so that we minimize anybody getting heat stroke. Or that just took one trip in the field, right? Like, I've never done this before.
Simple
I
things.
worked in
Right.
healthcare, right? Like, I worked in healthcare for 12 years. We were in a building, right? So
Right.
like, I don't know what policies you need for people who work outside. So to your point, what did I do? I went and rode with them and asked them what they needed.
Yep.
They told me, I wrote it down, got the budget approved,
And
and that's what everybody did. They're like, that was amazing. I'm like, no, that was just John. Like, that's just what
that's
Brandon said. That's
elementary.
it. Yeah.
It's
But you look,
elementary.
but it's for you look so progressive, and it's not. Like you
Correct.
said, like you
Correct.
can you can gauge people who are not trying to take advantage of the system. So that
Yep.
it does require some discernment, right?
Yep.
Like that but once you gauge the people who are being honest, then like you said, just take them at their word, and then let that lead your perspective. And then when you go back into the office, when you go back to the drawing board, you're bringing those people with you, right? And then when you roll it out, everybody loves you, because
Exactly.
you took their perspective into consideration, and they can see it,
Yeah.
in when things get rolled out and when policies get changed as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's okay to get gamed, right? Just don't get gamed over and over and over again,
Yeah,
right?
and
Like
you'll learn. And it's
you're
funny
go-
because when you get game, they be
exactly.
like,
You're
"Yeah,
gonna
he
learn.
got you."
You're gonna
The
learn.
other people be like, "I don't know why you listen to him. We would have told you he was
Yeah.
crazy." It's like, why ain't nobody warned me? They're like, you had to learn like we learned. He burned us too, right? It's like you
Exactly.
get trial
It's
by
only gonna
fire.
happen once.
Yeah, exactly. And then you learn and be like, all right, he had a little shifty eye a little bit. I'm gonna look out for him next time. But it is, you also learn
Exactly.
that way, right? Like,
You
I talk about
learn.
that,
You
like
learn.
hiring employees. And there would be times where like I'd have managers or somebody going through the hiring process. I'm like, this employee is gonna be terrible. But I'd let them hire him anyway.
Sure.
And because
Sure.
I would never, and I tell people I'm never going to be the deciding vote, even though I'm the executive, because they have to work for y'all. So I
Yep.
would always be involved in the process, but I would never tell anybody what I think.
Right.
So if it was like a split, if it was like a 2-2 or whatever, I would weigh in. But like if it's 3-1 and y'all all agree y'all want to hire this dude, and I can see
Go
that
for
he's
it.
going to be a dumpster fire, I just let it happen. But what I would tell people, that I said, because there was two things. Either one, I saw something that you could have potentially had the opportunity to develop out of them,
Mm-hmm.
or it's something that you need to see, because again, there are problems that I can deal with an employee that somebody else can't,
Right.
right? My tolerance, my patience,
Yes.
my right. So
Yes.
like that's the problem when you do panels, and like, yeah, like that might not be a problem for you, but it's a problem for them. So like people
Exactly.
need to understand what they can manage and what they cannot,
Yep.
right? Like I knew, like for me, like I am not great at giving compliments, right? Like my discernment is about problems. I see things that are wrong with people, processes, right? Like that is my gift. That is my God-given gift. My wife is an exhorter. I exhort people through critique. My wife exhorts people through compliments. You need both,
Right.
right? But I mean, when I would have people who work for me, and I could just tell that, like, if I
They
didn't, I
needed it.
literally would have to schedule compliments, right? Like, and
Yeah.
then when they
Yeah.
wanted more, I'd have to tell them, like, look, you need to go get a mentor,
Yeah.
right? Like, I am not the person who's going to scratch your insecurity itch.
Yep.
I'm not. I will let you know you're doing a great job. I will develop you in your strengths. I will help you identify your weaknesses. But I'm like, your insecurity is not something, like, if you want a mentor, I will pray for you after work. But during work hours, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not
Yep.
here. Like, I can't do
Yeah.
that, because it's
I
going to
agree.
require a disproportionate amount of my time committed to you, and that's not fair to other people. But
Yeah,
I literally told a young lady, I was like, but get you a mentor. I will connect you with a mentor who I know is just like you, who loves all the positive affirmation and gets up and reads them to herself in the mirror every day. Like, that's great. Like, you need that kind of connection. But like, I know that like you're going to feel like you're not doing a good job working for me because I'm
for
not going
sure.
to give you enough positive affirmation. So
For
let
sure.
me work with you and get somebody else that can do that for you. And then we can triangulate. I'll let her know you're doing well so she can keep repeating it to you every week.
That's
But I'm like,
beautiful.
I can't do that, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not, if I do, and my other thing is about being authentic and about being, I can't write a book about authenticity and then sit up here and just let Gemini automate it or send you an automated message every week because that's not
Right.
me, right? I
Right.
would be lying if I did that. So I'm
Yeah.
going to be intentional during our one-on-ones because I love you, right? But I
Yeah.
also love you enough to know that I'm not the person that should solve
I'm
that,
not
that
a
should
hundred.
to be the solution to this issue for you, right? And it worked well, right? Like I got her a mentor. Mentor loved it because she needed that engagement and that
Yeah.
feedback. And
Yeah.
I'm like, both of y'all can leave me alone. That is wonderful. You are doing a good job. Thank you for doing
And
that.
you can stay in your genius.
Exactly, right? Like,
Yeah.
but no,
That's awesome. No, I love that. That's again, that is self-awareness, you knowing where you're at and being able to be real with people about where they're at and what your capacity is to fulfill their, like you said, their itch, and I'm very similar, although I do give compliments. I'm very similar in that if I can see that you need it, there's something in me that just if it's not coming authentically, I can't give it. So
yeah.
I feel you on that
Yeah.
completely. And finally, what's next for you? What exciting projects do you have or goals? What's your next book? Tell us what we can expect in the horizon.
Yeah, so what's next will be something old that hopefully I'll make new, right? I got married in 2006 and kind of just going into our marriage, me and my wife come from a lot of divorce between our parents. Our parents have been married 12 times across the four of them.
Wow.
So we don't come from a background with a lot of structure around family and
Yeah.
marriage. So just praying about it, asking God vision for our family. He gave me what I called the 4 F's of a peaceful marriage, right? And it was like
Okay.
these are 4 pillars that you can have, and if you start on a foundation of faith and you have these 4 pillars, you'll be good. And I wrote the outline. I kind of started like writing the structure of a book, and then I was like, well, God, I clearly am not supposed to write this book now because I've been married for like a year or less than a year, and no one's gonna listen to me. I wouldn't listen to myself. So, but that's one. And I mean, me and my wife have used it for marriage counseling and some other things over the years as well. So I think the next thing for me will actually be to do that because I think leadership within family, right? It's still leadership, but it's how we
Yeah.
lead within our family. It's how our family impacts the way that we lead within our communities, in the way that our children lead, in the things that they do as well. So that'll probably be the next thing on top of. I'm also working with an organization here soon. We're gonna have a kind of new launch of the art of leading as like an online course. So
Beautiful.
working with an organization, and so they've kind of redone a lot of because I had like a leadership course, and I'm like, I don't really like my leadership course because I'm not an LMS learning management person. So, but yeah, we've actually got that piloting right now with some people, and it'll probably be released towards the end of this year. But that'll be really cool. It'll be interactive, and going through, and then they'll have videos and lessons and all of that stuff in there, and then that'll start getting positioned for corporate like LMS systems
Yep.
and all of that as well. So those are the
Yeah.
two things. So I've got some people working on that for me. I already wrote the book, so they're doing the art of leading. But yeah, the next big thing for me will be diving into with my wife and working on this book on marriage because I feel like there's a lot of animosity and ill will towards marriage right now. Does people feel like it's
Yeah.
not worth it? It isn't worth the sacrifice. And yeah, no, I've had an amazing marriage. But it comes from starting with very basic principles, starting with truth, starting with honesty, kind of at the
Hmm.
beginning, and then building from there. So it's worked in 18 years of marriage. I'd say this all the time. People think I'm lying. Like me and my wife have never had a fight.
Wow.
My wife has I have never disrespected my wife, and actually the
Yeah.
entirety of me knowing her since I was 17 years old, but especially in marriage. And one of the things I tell people, just as a real quick thing, we all can go our entire careers without ever cussing out our boss, but most of us can't go a week without cussing out our spouse. That's a choice.
That is a
That's a choice.
choice.
It's not right. When you
But
talk about self-awareness and emotional intelligence,
respect.
you're not getting fired every week because you cussing out your
Yep.
significant other because
Yeah,
or because you're cussing out your boss, because you're not conditioned to think that that's okay.
that's
But we're
okay.
conditioned to
100%.
think that it's okay to be
Yeah.
disrespectful, to cuss out our significant others, our husbands, our wives, our children. When that's who, and that's why the Bible says our family is our first ministry, which means who deserves the best of you, right,
Is
is your
your family.
family. So like,
Yeah.
why do we settle for giving them less? I've never yelled at one of my employees in 14 years of having and put people all over the year. I've never cussed them out. I've never gone off on them.
Never.
Never. So
Correct.
like, I don't understand why it's surprising to people when I say I've never done it to my wife. I've never done it to my employees as well, and they didn't give me
Yeah.
3 beautiful children and a lot of the stuff, like take care of me, make sure I'm good, right? Like, she's
Yeah.
been in the hospital with me when I got horrible diagnoses because I have 4 different autoimmune diseases, right? Like if I owe her more
Yeah.
than I owe anybody else. So like,
100%.
um, and that's always my challenge, right? And just for people in general, is like, are we actually giving our best to the people who deserve it, or are we giving
Mm.
it to everybody else, right? So we don't have anything left when we come home. So I've been
Where are
kissing
you putting
everybody
it?
else behind all day, so now I'm
Yeah.
short with everybody else. But
That's
it should be
money
the
right
should be
there.
the other way around. But that's what next, and hopefully that'll have some impact as well, and just help people kind of look at family and marriage in a new light.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. I'm very excited. I'm also going to grab a copy of your book because it sounds pretty dope. I love the fact that you transition, being a leader, doing it, because doing it, like you said, is only two things, and then transitioning. I think transitioning is something that I've never thought of myself. So
Yeah.
definitely going to pick up a copy of that. What are some of your final thoughts and where can people find you?
So I'll start. People can find me roydockery.org. So if you Roy Dockery MBA, find me on TikTok, LinkedIn, um, uh, Instagram, all of that stuff. Facebook for us old people.
Yeah,
I'm on Facebook as well.
me too.
As in the art of leading on there as well. I guess my closing thoughts would be, I just want everyone to understand that regardless of what your title is, what your role is, that if you have influence, you are a leader, right? And
Yes,
whether you can influence one person, whether you can influence 3 people, a small team, a community, right, an office, it doesn't matter. Like, you have influence, and God gave you that influence for a reason. So when you
yes,
understand your purpose and you use your influence to walk in your purpose, like, the impact is immeasurable, like the
yes,
impact is significant, in the lives of those people that you touch, in the places that everywhere that your feet step, like, you're going to have an impact, and it doesn't matter what your title is, right? Like, I lead
yes,
everywhere, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's just because that my purpose is to be a leader of leaders, so it doesn't matter where I'm going. I'm going to walk in that purpose, and I'll use that influence if I've got a title or not, um because that's just what God put me. But that's the main thing. Like, everybody is a leader. So learn how to use your influence to have an impact in alignment with the purpose that God gave
that's beautiful, Roy. Thank you so much.
you.
I've enjoyed this conversation tremendously. I've learned a lot, and I have a feeling that this is not going to be our last one. So, looking forward to our next one, hopefully.
Absolutely. No,
Um,
thanks, Romy, for having me, and I appreciate that. That a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time and chatting with me this evening.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody else, for listening to another episode of Leadership from the Heart, and we'll see you next week with another episode.